I wanted to kind of help bust some of the myths too that people are saying. One is that DACA in itself is not status, right? You're technically sort of still undocumented, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is called deferred action, meaning that basically you're low-lying fruit and the government's like, we're going to defer taking deportation action against you, right? And because of that, we're just going to give you a work permit. But that is it.
You know I can't help but these, cause they know they can never touch these. So baby, let me talk my shit, or I might just go another feed.
One thing that I wanted to say too is that I do see this actually come out in the immigrant community, and I think it's that whole good versus bad immigrant narrative, right? As to who is more deserving. And, Elizabeth, I don't know what your experience has been, but I've had DACA recipients, I've had immigrant students even tell me like, well, I made it, I did this, I should get my papers, right? Instead of like, well, what about your parents and all the other people who make up the 11 million undocumented folks, right? So it's really changing that narrative. And then something that I often do in my work is, I am a white passing Latina, right? White people accept me as white when they see me, or when they want to, I should say, right?
Cuando les conviene.
Cuando les conviene, right? And they draw the line, and that's another also long story that we can talk about, experiences that we've all had. But something that I always tell, like I make a note in my class that I do, is that as you see me is how I go to class, right? I hate wearing suits. I hate adopting what is professional, right? For the notion of who defines professionalism. White people do, right? Anyways, the notion of how important it is as this generation to show up as our true selves. And I like to challenge, what is the notion of an attorney? What is the notion of a law professor, right? Because I even tell my students, like, how many of you have had a law professor that looks and acts like me and is my age, right? And they're like, none. I was like, exactly, right? And seeing that when we occupy these spaces, it's exhausting, but it's political, right? Our existence in these spaces is a political act in itself, right? And to be conscious of that and be rebellious when we take up that space. So it's like, how can we just continue to do that and inspire future generations to also do that?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I want to bring in DACA for a second, because there's so many misconceptions about this. So DACA has really been on the verge of extinction pretty much from like the Trump administration, probably before that. Republicans have been talking about it forever, about how they really just want this thing to disappear. Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you first, and then I would love to get a lawyer's perspective on this. Are you afraid that DACA is just gonna vanish tomorrow?
I wouldn't say like afraid. I would say prepared. I'm expecting it. And I do have, I'll be honest, like I kind of have like a pessimistic view of like, and I'm like, I really want to say like I'm an expert on DACA, not just because I have it, but I think when we spoke earlier, I said, in a way, DACA recipients and people who are undocumented who just don't have DACA, we are kind of forced to be like our own legal attorneys, because we are forced to keep up with the news. Like DACA has been challenged like 10,000 times at this point. I remember when Jeff Sessions announced that he was rescinding it. Then it went to the federal court in San Francisco. Then it went to like some court in Texas. Then it went to the Supreme. I know the whole timeline. And at this point, I think we're expecting a decision to come in the next couple of months. But I'm just kind of expecting it at this point. So I think now, and I've talked to a lot of DACA recipients are like, okay, what are we going to do? And I think for myself, in my experience, I was able to live life. And by that, I mean, I didn't worry, right? I didn't worry whether it was with the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration. We've had 3 presidents now. Nothing has been done. But I was able to live life. And by that, I meant I was able to go to school, finish school, have jobs, go to concerts, like live life. I was able to live life, to move, to sign a lease, to come to Los Angeles, like take vacations. I was able to live life. And I feel like maybe, and I say this not in a way that it's guilty, because we are all deserving to live a full and fulfilling life, regardless of your legal status. But it's kind of like, wait, hold up. You should probably start thinking of what you're going to do if this gets taken away, when it gets taken away. So I've been kind of like starting to think about that, because now I'm no longer a child And I think when you talk about DACA recipients, you're like, oh, these young people. I'm like, girl, it's been 10 years. Like, I'm
Right.
starting to like put some night cream on because we are old at this
You gotta
point.
whip out those retinols.
Yeah. I'm like, girl, we are not, I'm sorry. Like, I think I may look young, but we are not young anymore. There are people who are in their 40s
Mhm.
who have DACA, and it's like, what Peter Pan syndrome are you guys talking about? That these young kids.
The Benjamin Button.
Yeah,
syndrome,
it's like, okay, first of all, it's the rice and beans that keeps us young. But no, like we're not young anymore.
Yeah.
And it just frustrates me so much that they think that we're still like young. And it's like, no, we want to like start thinking about having kids and families and buying a house and
Yeah.
just living life. But I'm just kind of preparing for that to happen.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with this whole administration. I watched the State of the Union and he's like, yeah, time to pass an immigration reform. Like, yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
But like when and
When?
how are we going to do that?
Mhm.
And yeah, I've worked a lot with different organizations who are advocating for the registry. So that is already something that exists. It's not a law. It's not being like, it's something that exists.
Right.
But yeah, it was just, it existed for people who were able to come to the United States before 1972 and they can obtain residence through that. But that's, what, 40 years ago?
Yeah.
Like over 40 years ago?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
girl. like,
Yeah.
yeah. And
In a
then
minute.
I do TikToks on my time trying to like educate, like, yeah, this is what DACA means. And I think a lot of people have this misconception of DACA
They
that
do.
you can like vote. And I've had people I'm very open about having DACA, right? It's on my Instagram bio. I don't call myself like a DACA recipient. I call myself like a DACA cutie. So that's just me
I
trying
love
to
it.
like,
I love it so much.
change the narratives over here.
Yeah.
But I have so many times people have asked me like, so like, who did you vote for? And I'm like, girl, like what, on American Idol? Because I can't vote. I can't vote over here. So people ask like, who'd you vote for? And it's like, for what? Like,
Yeah.
I can't.
When?
Yeah.
But for who?
And we also don't, we're not eligible to get like food stamps. We're not eligible to like,
So many
So much.
people
oh girl.
have such a big misconception about
Yeah.
that. They call DACA recipients moochers,
Oh, yeah.
lazy. They just want a free ride. They
Oh,
just want
yeah.
a free meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but
then
that's not true.
I'm lucky because I'm also in California. So I went to school in California, like college.
Mhm.
So yeah, we're not eligible for federal financial aid. We're eligible for in-state tuition. And I also graduated debt-free because a girl is smart and I got all those scholarships.
Amazing.
So yeah, and the funny thing and the most thing that I find sarcastically hilarious is that, tax season is coming up
Mhm.
and you bet you guys like, we pay our taxes
Yeah.
and we pay so much. Like, girl, I pay more taxes than Donald Trump over here.
Yeah.
And I cannot reap the benefits of, social services. And it's like, wait, my money goes to that. Like, shouldn't I be able to like get that? And it's
Right.
like, no. So, yeah, having DACA is exhausting. Very grateful for it. It has opened a lot of opportunities for myself. But, and I think really quick touching upon like Latinos kind of fighting against each other, even in like the DACA community, there is that conversation where it's like, I also know a lot of people who don't have DACA, who are older than like 40 because they just didn't qualify for it. And now we have a whole new generation of young kids who are actually young, who are now graduating college or attending college, who also don't qualify for DACA. So now we have two generations, ones that are older and ones that are younger, who just don't qualify, and this government's not doing anything.
Right.
So it's very like surprising. I just got, I was very lucky that I just happened to be born and brought to the United States at a certain time.
Right.
But now there's also this kind of like fighting a little bit where it's like, but I have DACA and I
Right.
paid my taxes and
That
I'm a
makes it
model
better.
citizen and
Mhm.
I never got a DUI, so I should be first. And like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. It's not just like me. And I know a lot of politicians, they love DACA recipients, right?
Mhm.
Because we went to school, but whether we did or didn't, that doesn't make us better or more deserving of a citizenship.
Mhm.
But it's more like, yeah, I went to school. Yes, quote unquote, I'm that model, DACA cutie. But also like my mom, like
Yeah.
my parents, other people's parents who didn't qualify for DACA, who have been working for decades.
Yeah.
I am not more deserving than my mom, and I am not more deserving than people who are in their 40s and 50s who don't have DACA, or younger kids than myself who also don't qualify. So we're not like better, but I know the government paints us
Paints
as
it as
like,
that.
oh yeah, DACA people are going to be like the first in line. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's BS.
Yeah.
I'm not more deserving than other people.
It's that same mentality that I think some Puerto Ricans have, where just because we're citizens and we have that quote unquote privilege, that makes us better immigrants because we don't have to like do the illegal thing. We don't have to cross illegally. We don't have to do all of this stuff. And it's not the majority mentality, but I do see it. And I always think to myself, you know, you're kicking it with Dominicans, you're kicking it with Haitians, and you're living in the same areas, and you're probably marrying each other and blending families together. And this elitism that comes through of like, well, I'm better because I have this privilege that I didn't ask for, that was just given to me because of whatever. It's almost that same mentality of like, just because I was born between this time and this time, I happen to be able to have this privilege, and these people don't, so screw them.
Yeah.
Right.
And I hate that to the 10th degree, because there are just so many people who, you know, I honestly just got lucky that I was brought to the United States at a certain time period, born at being a certain age, right?
Yeah.
You had to be like under like 16 before I brought you. Girl, I was 1. So like, sadly, but you know, my mom is not less than I am, or someone who is, you know, there's also legally, I'm going to my legal DACA bag for a second. If you, right now, the way that DACA stands is only renewals. So if you have had DACA, you can renew. And people say it's for 2 years. No, it's like 16 months, because you have to renew 5 to 6 months in advance. So you also have to pay $500, and now it's 2 payments. So in case if anyone knows, holla.
Yeah.
But if you, let's say you went through financial hardship, you had a parent, medical bills, whatever the case, that you just couldn't afford, one, legal fees, because people like to renew their DACAs with the lawyer because it's a lot safer, you know, so on. And then $500 for the application. Sometimes people may not renew. And if you do not renew within a 1 year, it is considered a brand new application. And right now, USCIS is not accepting brand new renewals. So people have been kind of phased out of their DACA because they just couldn't renew in a timely manner for, you know, for whatever reason.
Or didn't have the money.
Didn't have the money.
$500 is still a lot of money, y'all.
That is like, that could be rent money. Like,
Right.
this gas
Grocery
prices,
money.
these eggs, girl, that's expensive.
Grocery money,
So-
gas money. Yeah.
So people have been phased out. So I always think about people who have been phased out, and I know super close friends who have been phased out. And it's like, shoot, my heart breaks for you, and I wish I could do something, because we are in the same category where you had it. Like, we got our fingerprints. Like, the government knows, like, you haven't done anything wrong. Like, please just accept you again.
Right.
But, you know, I've known people who have tried to reapply again just in case, and there goes $500 down the drain, because the government's not going to refund you your $500.
And the emotional toll.
Oh yeah, and I think at some point, I think it was under the Trump administration, when either some federal court, they struck it down and it said no, DACA stays. It wasn't the Supreme Court, that for like maybe 6 months, initial applications were eligible, and a bunch of people renewed. And then again, it went to the courts, and the court said no. So a lot of people turned in their application and lost that money, because once again, the court said no, it's just going to be renewals. And it's just a bunch of BS.
Yeah. And Marissa, I wanted to ask you, from a lawyer's perspective, like, you see a lot of different types of cases. You're dealing with all different sorts of ethnicities and countries and things like that. Can you explain a little bit, like, why you think DACA is in constant flux, why there is that generational divide between that one group that was able to get it and everybody else who was not eligible? And then also, I want to talk a little bit about the citizenship process, because it's very long. I just realized how long it is and there's so many steps to it. You were mentioning green cards, and then visas, and then citizenship. So tell us the process. Like, what is it?
One thing I wanted to say is that my clinic does do DACA renewals for free. So if you all are in LA,
I was going to ask, we have resources.
And we actually have access to funding.
Nice.
So I don't know when this is going to come out, but holler at the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic.
Please,
happy to do your DACA renewals, and happy to figure out if we can cover your filing fee.
Nice.
So, and then a couple of things too is that I wanted to kind of help bust some of the myths too that people are saying. One is that DACA in itself is not status, right? You're technically sort of still undocumented, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is called deferred action, meaning that basically you're low-lying fruit and the government's like, we're going to defer taking deportation action against you, right? And because of that, we're just going to give you a work permit. But that is it, right? It does not open up a pathway to residency. It does. And then another thing too is if you are undocumented in the United States or have DACA, you actually do not have access to any type of public benefit. So the only people who can access public benefits are U.S. citizens, green card holders, and certain people when they have certain humanitarian visas, right? So if like you're a victim of trafficking per se, but nobody else. So that whole myth of like, oh, I have DACA now that I can get, no, you actually can't, right?
Wow.
And then I think the taxes, right? The majority of people who are undocumented do pay taxes. You can actually pay it with something called an ITIN, an individual tax identification number. You don't even need a social security, right? So I always like to add those things in when I can.
Yeah.
We also can't travel.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
You can't leave the country.
Well, I can leave.
Oh, you can't.
But I can't come back.
You can apply for advanced parole though.
Yes.
So that was another. So a couple of things I want to say too is that
important.
So advice that I want to give to DACA recipients, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off tangent from your question, is right now advanced parole is still an option. Advanced parole is basically a travel document that you can request from the government to travel abroad for either humanitarian, business purpose, or educational purposes. I run an educational program where I take DACA recipients abroad with me to engage in immigrant rights work. And one gives you the opportunity to leave and then come back, right? But it's really, really important that if you're interested in advanced parole, because it's risky, you need to talk to an attorney who makes sure to check if you have any bars that can be triggered on your way back, right? The trick is if you have that lawful entry into the United States, it provides you a protection called 245A. I don't want to get too into the weeds of it, but I know.
You start talking numbers, my brain is like,
offers you a protection that can potentially in the future help you adjust status, apply for a green card, depending if you have an avenue of some way. That's all I'm going to say. But so if you're interested in advanced parole, please, 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 please do it, right? DACA recipients, I feel, are used, it's basically a ping pong, right? Like, that's what it is, right? They're used to appeal to Democratic voters, right? Because it's that good immigrant.
Yeah.
Like, these are the ones that we're going to help stay in the United States.
The DACA cutie.
Yeah, the DACA cuties, right? And then it's used by Republicans. They're like, no, they're illegals and we're going to take it away, right? So that's what DACA recipients are. And I'm so sorry because I see how this emotional toll takes on my students who are documented, my clients, us as advocates, because we're doing this work trying to figure out what's going on, right? As to the future of DACA, it is uncertain, right? Because the Supreme Court that we have right now is crazy. It is nuts. Like,
and we're gonna have them for a while.
For a while. And they've issued other decisions where I'm like, okay, so you're ending MPP, the migrant protection protocols, but then you took away our rights here. Like, what is going on? So anyways, it's very unpredictable, right? So my best advice for DACA recipients has always been, one, if you can access advanced parole right now, do it, right? You'd be surprised the amount of times that we do consultations with DACA recipients and it turns out that they qualify for a form of relief and don't realize it. I've also had DACA recipients who were subjected to labor trafficking, right? Like they don't realize it. So the importance of like just knowing your rights. And then again, going back to like the generational gap, I think it really comes down to that one, we can trace it back to colonialism / American culture as being so individualistic. And again, this whole good versus bad immigrant narrative, right? And the fact that DACA recipients, and that's another thing is that we talk about, like we've talked about in my clinic with my colleagues, is like the importance of highlighting DACA recipients who aren't your doctors and your lawyers, right? But who are then, hardworking and then they're supporting their family of 4, right? And supporting their parents and like how those stories also have to be elevated, right? So as to the future of DACA, I wish I could say that I'm really
optimistic.
Uncertain. I'm just uncertainty. So it's really important right now that take advantage of these programs that you can right now. And then the other thing that I always tell my DACA recipients, I've had so many DACA recipients lose, because you can lose your DACA too by simple convictions, right? DUI is incredibly common. Everyone and their mom has a DUI, but it does cause you to lose your DACA. Another thing too is I know weed is illegal in LA, right? In California.
Not federally.
It's still federally.
We're the haven over here.
Federally, it's illegal, which is you as a DACA recipient, because federal laws apply to you, should probably not be smoking weed, right? Because I have had incidences before where clients travel out of state or they go on advanced parole and they tell the CBP officer, like, yeah, I smoke weed from time to time. And that's an immigration bar, right?
Mhm.
So those are always the tidbits that I love
Yeah.
to tell my documented
Wow.
students, clients. But
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
lot to think. I mean, as you're talking, I'm like, there's so much to think about. And anytime there's a fear or a limitation, it's going to guide the way that you choose to move in the world,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
the decisions that you make. It's no longer just, oh yeah, I can just go out the door, go grab a job and pay my rent, right? Now it's like, okay, but when I walk out the door, is it going to be safe? And who am I going to talk to? And can I say this? And how much money do I have? And then 6 months from now, I got to apply for this thing.
Mhm.
And I loved when I was talking to you, Stewart, earlier this week, where you were even mentioning about your visa process and all of the things that you have to think about as you're going through the job process. And now you have a job and now you're in a different state. And although it's more diverse here, you still have applications to go
Yes.
through. You can't see your family. You were telling me about, how difficult and how lonely of a process it is to talk to your family that you are not allowed to see because, as she said, you can leave, but you can't come back.
Exactly.
What
yeah.
does that do? Like, how do you manage that?
I don't know if you can manage it.
Yeah.
It's like, you just, it's like this mutual understanding you have with your family, and you just like, sort of like, it's the reality of life. Like, I have OPT, that's the optional practical training,
Mm-hmm.
but like, I had applied for a visa, but then like, I had to cancel my appointment because like, even though technically it's supposed to be okay, like, I have a job, I have a master's degree, I should be fine
Right.
in theory. But then, like, like when you get all these stories from other people who have done it, and like you go to the embassy and they can tell you, okay, for some reason, like somebody you find is not the right person, or like they would just say no. And then you went out of the country. Now you've lost everything because you left all your things here. So you can't come back. And so you're like stuck. So at the end of the day, you have to decide like, okay, it's better for me to stay here and try to work through all these things rather than trying to go home. And so like you're just there, like you keep on, and then at the end of the day, I have like after like 6 months or 7 months, I have to reapply for my renewal, which is still the same things. Like they've just increased it to $500 or something like that. You apply for it, but then you don't know like if you're going to get it. Like it's not like
It's not guaranteed.
it's not guaranteed that you're going to get it, and so you just don't know. And the system is like they are not responsive. They had some issues with their website, and you try. They say, okay, this is how you apply, but then you apply. It took me almost 2 weeks to just get my photo validated in this thing, and like people were having all these issues, and you ask them and somebody is like, they've not read the email. It's like, I specifically said what the problem was, what the problem is, but they just say, oh, you should do this, it's required because this is it. But then I'm like, okay, I'm getting a problem with like my photo. I can't just upload it. It's giving me an error. Could you do it? And they're like, oh, we need the photo because you have to do it. I'm like, okay.
So it affects your life in every way.
Yeah, you just there and like you just don't know.
Right.
And then as new presidents come in, as things change, you don't know if you're going to stay or you have to go.
Right.
And so you keep on being prepared for a day when they will just kick you out because you just don't know. And then once you off OPT, you have to get H1B visa, and that is tied to only your job. And so that means I can't change any job.
And probably can't get fired too, right? Like you can't get fired otherwise.
They can fire you.
Yeah, you would just lose your status.
Yeah,
you just lose your status with it,
and
right?
once you're fired, then you're stuck because you can only be deported.
Right.
And like, so all
That's
these
so
things.
much.
Yeah. And once that is done, then you have to go through the green card application, which is also another process. And
and a long process.
Oh
Of that.
God, it is
Yeah.
a long process. So you'd like never done
Mhm.
until when, I don't know if you ever done, because
Yeah.
then you have to do the citizenship like
And see
test.
if that
Yeah,
works out.
and then
Mhm.
I don't know.
So do you build up a certain sense of resiliency? Because it sounds like there almost has to be a part of your brain where if you're constantly thinking about this, you'll go insane. So
Mhm.
is there a part of you that's like, I just have to build up this natural resiliency, otherwise I'm gonna go crazy?
You just learn. Like
Mhm.
I
You have to
think
be your own
you
researcher.
you just have to sort of start feeling that, okay, this is, if this is what I want,
Yeah,
then this is how I'm going to fight it.
right.
And like, I think once you've gone through, and maybe that's why people become defensive about
Mm-hmm.
when other people come in, like when they're coming, because like I feel like, okay, I've worked so hard, like maybe I should be like, this is my reward and nobody's going, like I don't want other people to take
Yeah.
it away from me.
That's their own
Yeah.
trauma response
Yeah,
to
to
all of the things that they have to
all
deal
the
with.
things that they've dealt with. And so to me, I keep on trying to just keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Like I know, like we have this saying in Luganda, like which is like Oxulam garage full motoka, which means that you staying in a garage does not make you a car. And like there are no cars that are made in a garage.
Mhm.
Okay, depends, but for the most part, for the most
Yeah.
part, they are not. And so that to me keeps me a little bit grounded, because I know even though I'm in the US, I'm not American.
Mhm.
And I'll never be an American, even though I would, like, if I became citizenship wise, I'm still Ugandan.
Yeah.
And that's where I come from. And so that helps me to understand, okay, now since I'm not an American, I'm not a car, so that means I have to just try to behave the way people are going to treat me. And you try to change as the tides come in, and that helps. Like to me, it has been helpful, because then I don't develop so much hatred
Yeah.
for the people.
Mhm.
Because like if you look at what is going on, like you have to do all these things, and you have to study. You study very well, you pass your exams, and you do all these things, and then somebody says you can't get this job even though you want it.
Right.
And so then if you're going through all these things, you become so
Hateful.
hateful about like, why are they doing this to me? Like I have
Mhm.
worked, I've done what they told me I should be. I am a good person. So technically I should be getting this. It's a reward that I should be getting. But if you're not getting it, then you become so defensive, and so for me it helps me to just stay calm and know that it's a process. Like if I want to stay here, I would have to do it. But then also the biggest other thing is that I know my country is still there.
Mhm.
Like I know I have a place to go. Whereas like other people who were born here and they don't have any other country, like
Right.
they have
don't know anything else.
they don't know anything. And so now if you're 40 years and they are going to deport you back,
Right.
to where?
Right.
To who?
Then you have
Like,
to start over.
yeah, you have to start over, and you don't know anybody. Your family is here. So how are you going to
Yeah.
like start all over again? And so it just feels that four-letter word fair,
Yeah.
which to me I know it's an illusion that there's no fair.
I want to ask you, Yancy, since you are a child of immigrants rather than an immigrant yourself, I asked this question of all the people that wanted to be on this episode. Unfortunately, we only had so many seats, so we couldn't fit everybody in. But for the most part, there was a divide. When I asked the question, do you think your parents made the right choice in coming to the United States, or would you have preferred that they stayed in their home country? It was very divided. Some were like, yes, they made the right choice. I have a lot more opportunity now. I was able to get an education. I have a good job, etc. And then there were others that were like, I'm still poor. We're still living in a 1-bedroom apartment. I wasn't able to graduate college. I don't have a good job. I don't know if they would have been better off in their home country than if they had come here. I feel like my experience isn't really that great. So, as children of immigrants, our parents make choices based on their experience. but we also have our experience. Yancy, from your point of view, do you think that your parents made the right choice?
I would say that I'm very grateful to be able to say that where we are right now, that we ended up pretty all right. And I would say that they did, and they had to, right? In the 80s, during the conflict in El Salvador, I mean, there was no option to stay, right? Women were being raped, men were being recruited and killed, right? So there was no other choice for them.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that they've worked so hard. I think I got emotional during our interview, and I'm like,
it was beautiful.
Like, they just worked so hard, right? And they've been able now to build out there. So they actually never decided to buy a house out here. They never really truly wanted to invest in that American dream, because I think they understood that at the end of the day, when they retire, this isn't home for them. Right? Home is in El Salvador for them, right? And interestingly enough, right, my parents came from very different social classes in El Salvador, right? So my mother was like well off, they had land, right? My father did not, right? So when they immigrated to the States, it was I think it's a really interesting phenomenon where their kind of social classes leveled out, right? All of a sudden they come here, and guess what? We're
both the same.
We're in the same boat. You know what I mean? And they were able to kind of band together, and through their partnership really, saved a lot, right? We're really those model kind of immigrants, right? Where they knew that they couldn't fuck up, right? Because if they did, like, that was it, I was able to get my education, right? And so I think, like, it's interesting, like, as a child of immigrants, like, this notion of kind of what you were speaking to, Elizabeth, like both a love and appreciation for the life and the opportunities that were given to me, and also like a deep sense of like resentfulness and like true like hatred, I think, for what America stands for and how it was created, and like the inception of these systems that really go back so far, and then trying to like connect to like my ancestry and like my roots in El Salvador, and then going there and then being otherized, right, as like American, right, and never really truly being able to understand what it would be like to grow up there. So I think that's a really complex question, right? I don't know, right? But I think that we were fortunate enough now that they're in a place where they're going to be able to move back and really live out their beautiful retirement dream. And I mean, I'm just so grateful for that every day.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to answer that loaded question?
I'll go as quick as I can because I know I talk a lot. But I think I'm kind of like in the same boat as you, because from my experience, my decisions that my mom made. So I think, to answer your question, if my mom made that right choice, I still don't know. And I think growing up, especially more recently as I kind of grew into adulthood, I think I've had a lot of animosity and a lot of resentment towards my mom, because from what I understand, and I came to the United States when I was 1. So I have no recollection of Mexico whatsoever. So I can't really say like what my life would have been in Mexico. But also from what I know, from what my mom is told, and like Latina moms, they kind of tend to like over exaggerate. So I also don't even know if it's true.
No idea what you're talking about.
Never.
So, apparently I'm from San Luis Potosí, which is
That's
in
where
this,
my
really?
That's where my husband's from.
I don't know where that.
Okay, we'll talk about it. Yeah.
So all I know from San Luis Potosí is that it's beautiful, and I've seen Google pictures.
Yeah.
But it's in the middle of like Mexico, kind of like towards the tail a little bit, maybe. And it looks like a Yorkie on a map. That's all I really know. So the reason why my mom came here is she's separated from my dad, and she did have family out here. And then so I would also maybe consider myself like 3rd generation American, because my grandfather came to United States. I don't know what year. 60s, 70s, somewhere. And he had a bakery here, and then his daughter came, not my mom, but his daughter. So we've had a blend in my family. And then, but I just happened to be born in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, third generation American, but you know, I'm also a DACA recipient, but DACA cutie. But but you know, apparently we had a good life. My mom was college educated in Mexico, so she had a good job. She worked for like in the government in Mexico. So all of our experiences are different, and the choices why my mom came are hers and hers alone. And you know, she did have family out here, so you also have to think it's the 90s. So maybe things were a little bit easier at the time where she could work. Things like E-Verify didn't exist at the time. So she did have family. So maybe for her, it was kind of like, yeah, we're going to be okay. We do have family. I want to leave my husband and have a better life, opportunity, right? All of that. But then life happens and administrations come into play and barriers get put into place. And then I'm kind of now stuck in this position where I have to now plan ahead and think, okay, I'm a full adult at this point. I have income. I have rent. Do I want to have kids? I don't know. Am I able to have kids because of my status and really take care of another human? Like all of those things kind of run in my brain. But at kind of like what you were saying, it's like, well, this is life. This is the cards that we've been handed, and we have to do the best. And in the meantime, we're going to try our best and finesse our way because my mom was able to figure it out. She came not speaking the language, not having like a traditional American education, not having a lot of money. And I have an iPhone, a college education. I can speak two languages and really good networking. So I think I'm going to be okay. So I'm still kind of, you know, figuring that out, whether she made the right decision. But as far as I know, we're here. She's good. I'm good. She's on her way to becoming a green card holder. So, you know, things are looking okay. And whatever happens with DACA, well, we'll get to that point when we get there. So I'll let you know.
In Puerto Rico, we call it bregando. You just got to keep on going. Just keep going.
It is it's a tough question. And it's actually one that, you know, I think I told you a bit about my work in Guadalajara. And it's been one that has been very, in terms of my identity too, that I've struggled with, right? So I was born in Guadalajara, came to the United States when I was 2, right? Luckily, I was able to derive citizenship because my abuelita was born here, but they took her back to Puebla and she passed it on to my dad, who passed it on to me. So like also this weird like immigrant, but also like maybe third generation American thing going on. It also goes to show just like the fluidity of migration, right? But specifically between even more Mexico and the United States. And, you know, my parents left because of one, economic necessity, and two, you know, this was in the late 80s, early 90s when Jalisco was experiencing a lot of drug violence, right? So they decided to come here and we faced a lot of adversity, right? Experienced homelessness. My dad was disabled, wasn't able to hold down a job. You know, my family experience was violent, right? But then there was a lot of privileges and other immigrant like community members that really helped my family, right? In times of need. And I do believe that things happen for a reason. A lot of the work that I do is motivated because of my own personal experiences and that of my family, right? And then I think a lot about the women in my lineage, right? And the fact of what I'm doing as a Latina, as a professor, right? To be able to go back to my mom's pueblo, Ciudad Valle, San Luis Potosí, and tell them what I do. And my family is predominantly male, right? It feels good to kind of stick it to them sometimes. I love them. But, you know, just like being that cousin that's from the States who was like, oh, sí, mírala, sí, hizo todo esto. I was like, yeah. And I'm proud as one of the few women in my family to say that I did this. And then I actually didn't go back to Guadalajara for the first time until I turned 30. Which was 5 years ago. But I go back in a very privileged sense, right? I go back as a visiting professor at a university down there, also engaging in immigrant rights work. But I will say that experience has kind of given me a sense of like what my life could have been in the most privileged of senses, right? Had I been college educated and able to land a job of that sort. And the majority of my family is in Mexico too, right? So sometimes I feel like I missed out on that, like, being able to grow up with them, right? And that proximity.
And also the cultural.
Because at the end of the day, like you say, we go back home, right?
And you're the American.
Exactly, then we're other. And I was like, wait, I'm an American? What do you mean, right?
But then you realize
that you are.
There is a huge cultural difference.
So it's, it's been very interesting, but I will say too that, there's that saying, the ni de aquí ni de allá,
Yes.
right? But I also fully believe that there's power in that, right? And that's what I tell a lot of my students too, especially when we do this work, is that it's that understanding, right, of having to deal with this in between. And then sometimes we feel like we're robbed from experiences on both sides, but nonetheless, what we have is unique, right? That's the way I like to see it.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
So
Yeah.
beautiful.
Stuart, do
Yeah.
you feel
Oh.
like you've made the right decision?
I don't know. I'm still thinking about it, but
It's a work in progress.
yeah, so it's like when I was still in Uganda, one of my best friends were at school, and he just said this comment, which I still think about today. He's like, "Why weren't our parents taken as slaves to the U.S. So that we don't have to live this like hard life?"
Mm.
And like in the moment, like I was like, "Yeah, I think we should have taken," because like when we are told about the US, we are told about this ideal place
Mm.
where there are streets of gold.
Mm.
Everyone is
Yeah.
like Bill Gates, and everyone drives the fancy cars,
Everyone's rich. Everyone has a house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Everything's
so,
easier.
yes, like everything should be perfect. And so when I came here and I see like all these people on the streets, and like it's so cold, but life is so hard.
Mm.
And now I am grateful.
Mm.
I am grateful that I was able to experience the other part of Uganda, which was not good, which made me come here. But then I also see the US,
Mhm.
which is not this perfect, where picture perfect with things of in the movies where everyone is like going out,
Mhm.
having fun every day.
It's not the fantasy.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. And so there, like I'm like, okay, I am grateful for this experience because then I can choose who I want to be.
Yeah.
I can choose where technically I can choose where I can be. Like in some years to come, like I will be able to choose where I can be.
Yeah.
And that gives me so much power, even though in the moment it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like I am winning at this point, but I know I like some parts in the US. I know I don't like some other parts. I know where I have to stay and like how do I stay in my lane.
Yeah.
And like when I go back to Uganda, I still know. Like in Uganda, like when you guys go back, like you're seen as an American, it's the same thing.
Mm.
Everyone is like chocolate. Like who has the chocolate and you have to give them the chocolate, and like that is the best thing you could give everybody.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's chocolate is very cheap here.
Mm.
But then there it feels like it's this big thing.
Wow.
And so you're like, you just like feel like you're a little bit one step higher than everybody because you have this other experience in the US, which is good sometimes, but then if you don't use it well,
Right.
it becomes dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a similar experience where I grew up in my home country, so I know that I can always go back.
Mhm.
And I do go back often, several times a year, and that in itself is a privilege. And there have been times where I have felt like, oh, yo soy la gringa aquí. Like sometimes I lose my words when I'm speaking, or a little bit of that American accent comes out. And when I live here, I very much know I am not American. And I think in my youth, I used to think of myself as that because that was the fighter in me of like, I'm American. Yeah, I'm American. I'll celebrate July 4th. I'll do all these things, right? I'll be exactly what you want me to be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same.
And that was my assimilation. But at the end of the day, I feel very Puerto Rican. Very, very proud of my roots. And that is also something that has been instilled in us because of colonialism, and in particular US imperialism. So it is a very interesting thing when I think about the choice that my parents made. If I think about answering my own question, I think that it was the best choice for them. And now I have my own individual experience, and I have to choose how I want to move forward. And so I really, really appreciate all of you being here with me today. This has been such a great experience, even just chatting with you offline. I love putting together this episode, and just getting everybody here has been so special, just not only because I have the immigrant experience, but because I know there's so few places where we can tell our story. So the fact that you were able to do it in your own words, not have anybody else kind of, edit it and tell your story for you is really cool. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for
having
creating
us.
this.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed this conversation. Subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss another episode. Make sure that those notification bells are on. Do all the YouTube-y things. And if you are listening to us on the audio side, make sure to leave a review of this episode in particular. If you want to hear any more episodes like this, please let us know on Apple Podcasts and anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you on the next episode.
You know I can't help but these, cause they know they can never touch these.